Let me share. All right. All right, here we go. So I had just written the first version of a max script. You guys are going to write scripts that do minimums, averages, sums. What's the other one? Something else. So I'm in the sandbox directory. I created a directory called scripts. If I wanted to save this, I probably shouldn't put it in the sandbox directory. I should create a directory called scripts somewhere on in my home directory. I'm going to go into there and I'm going to create a script called max.py. This is just going to split off or print out the maximum value in a list of numbers. So what we're doing here is just looking at how to use Python as another command line pipeline filtering tool. Right, so we want to create some things that we could put into a command line pipeline to filter data. So first thing I did was we're going to have to put the Python interpreter's absolute path name into the shebang. So what I did was I just echoed or ran which Python that will print out where the Python executable is. And then I sent that to the file that I'm going to write as a Python script. And then I changed mod it to executable so that it's already executable. And then when I open this up, I need to add the shebang to it. But I guess the first thing I did was create a data file. So this is just a data file to test the script that I'm going to write. I just put in one number on each line. The script that we have right now is not going to support multiple numbers on line, so it's not going to be able to handle columns. It's only going to be able to handle a stream of numbers that come in one at a time, one on each line. So I've got some positive numbers, some negative numbers. I'm going to save this file. And now I'm going to open up my script. So I got to put the pound sign and the exclamation point in front of the Python executable name. You remember that we were using the file input module to do the reading of lines for us. Nice thing about this file input module is that it will read lines from a file if you give your script a file name, and if you don't give it a file name, it will read lines from standard input. So it'll act just like head, tail, cat, grep, all of those. So I need to import the file input module. This script is going to calculate a max. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a variable to store the maximum value that I've observed. Yes.
So for that import, as you said, it will take standard input.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a file that asks for something like that it's requesting a user input, if you use that import, will it feed that into the user?
No, this would be separate from something that is prompting the user for input. Okay. This is basically a module that just makes it easy to write filters that will either read from their input from a file or read their input from standard input.
Okay.
And then the for loop that I need to run, that I need to have in order to loop through every line to the standard input is just for line in file input, which is the name of the module. So I have to put that first, dot input. That takes care of getting the lines of input from wherever they're coming from, either standard input or from inside a file. The first thing that I'm going to do is strip off that new line character. We saw that every line in the file has a new line character, and then when we printed a line, it printed two new line characters. So I'm just going to strip that off, set line equal to line.strip, which will just replace the text that is in that variable named line with a stripped version. And then I was going to create, I'm wanting to compare these numerically, so I'm going to create a numerical version of it. So another variable called num, which is just the number that is represented by the text on the line. So you're also going to find that this script will choke if you have something that can't be converted into a number. So if you've got some text like a word on a line, that's going to cause trouble. All right, so the basic idea is if the number that is in this current line of input is greater than the max, then I want to replace the max with it. So I'm looking to see if num is greater than max, and if so, I'm going to set max equal to num. Yes, this is in the for loop, so it has to be indented. And then after I find that max, I just want to print it to the screen. So this script is going to read all input. That for loop is going to run until the last line of standard input is read or the last line in a file is read. And after that for loop gets done running, I want to print out what the value of max is. The maximum value
max as a global variable.
What's that?
You need to declare max as a global variable.
No. All right, so I'm going to save this and then run some data through it to test it. So we ran the data.txt file through it. I could just give data.txt as an argument to this script because it's that file input module handles this automatically. But I'm just going to use it as a stream filter, basically. So I'm going to cap the data.txt file. I'm going to send it to my script, and I get 3.0. In this case, the file is small enough that I can manually inspect it and see that, yes, 3 is the largest value in the file. Now I'm going to create a second data file that exposes the bug in here, the problem. All right, so if I have a file that contains data that is all negative, so there aren't any positive values in here, the first thing I do in my script is I set max equal to 0. So if I don't have any numbers that are greater than 0, max is never going to be reset. So in this case, I have all negative numbers. 0 is actually larger than all of the numbers in this data file. But when I run this data file through my script, it's going to print out 0. So I heard some discussion about how this would be solved in the last class period. Questions like, how do I can I represent negative infinity somehow so that all numbers would be considered greater than negative infinity? Actually, the way to do it is to check to see if max has been set. Now, there's no way to tell if max is actually 0 or if it was set to 0 initially. So what we want to do is we want to set max equal to something that indicates that it doesn't have a value in it. And Python has a special value named none, capital N-O-N-E. And you can check to see if a variable is equal to none, which basically means it doesn't contain anything, right? It doesn't contain a number, it doesn't contain text, it doesn't contain all of the other things that you could store in a variable. So this is a way for us to tell if we have set max before. So now what we need inside our for loop, what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if max is none, and if so, we will always set it equal to the number. And if not, we want to set it equal to the number only if the number is larger than max. So I could do an if-else statement, but actually this will do it as well. If I check to see if max is none, and the way that you check to see if a variable in Python is none is you just use is none. Right? You use the is keyword. So this will be true if max has not been set. I'm just going to set max equal to the number. Now, the next thing that's going to happen is that if statement right below that is going to check to see if number is greater than max. That doesn't matter though, right? If I set max equal to 10, and then I go along and I check to see if 10 is greater than 10, nothing's going to happen. So I don't really need an if-else statement. I just need an if statement that says, hey, look, if max is equal to none, go ahead and set it equal to this number, and then the rest of my script is the same as it was before. And all this does is allow us to catch that case where it shouldn't be 0 if all the numbers in the stream are negative. Data.txt produces the same thing as it did before, and now data2.txt gives me -1. All right, so for today, let's write some scripts that read from standard input and do the following. So basically the exact same for loop. I would say make copies of your files, right? Like don't create a file that does one of these and then modify it to do the other. Create one for each of these. So the one that we just wrote would be the maximum value in a stream. Do one for the minimum value in a stream, the sum of all values in a stream. So if you wanted to total up all of the numbers in a string, calculate the average of all values in a string, and then print out the absolute value of all values in the string. So the max, min, sum, and average, those are all going to print out one number to the screen. This last one, absolute value, is just going to print out the absolute value of all numbers to the screen. And then I've got some, I don't even know why we have sandboxes. They're not very, we hardly ever use them, but today we actually do. I've got some files in the sandbox that I want you to use your scripts to determine things like minimum value in the file, maximum value, maximum absolute value in the file, and so on.